This is Internet Marketing. Brought to you by Site Visibility at sitevisibility.com. This is Internet Marketing, and today I'm joined by Tom Capper, who is a consultant at Distilled. Tom, how are you?
Not bad. Yourself, Andy?
Yeah, pretty good. Let's start off. Surprise. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Tom, and a little bit about Distilled.
Sure. So I'll start with Distilled. So Distilled started out as a web dev agency 11 years ago, way before my time. But over time, sort of became better known for technical SEO expertise. And these days, we're a broader digital marketing agency. So we do, as well as the technical SEO that we've always done, we do CRO, analytics, PPC, creative, and digital PR. And we run 3 annual conferences around digital marketing and SEO. We have a training program and a blog as well. Mm-hmm. But in terms of myself, I studied economics at university and found Distilled at a careers fair in 2012. And so I originally worked with them as a data analysis intern before my final year of study. And I liked it so much that I came back here in 2013, joined the consulting team, which is where I am now.
I thought for a minute you were going to say, I liked it so much I bought the company.
If only.
Now, Google Analytics, it's a topic that we've covered quite a lot recently. I wanted your take on it because there's the title of today's show is Everything You Didn't Know About Google Analytics. There are some hidden quirks, aren't there? Things that we ought to know that aren't that well known. Tell us a bit about that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think we all use Google Analytics so much and it's so ubiquitous. We sort of just take it completely for granted. And as you know, the source of how everything's supposed to be done, and we don't really question it that much. But yeah, as you say, there are quite a lot of things that sort of go on beneath the surface that we don't really think about that we should, that have quite meaningful effects on decisions we actually make in the real world. Yeah. I've seen Google Analytics data presented without any caveats in pitch meetings, in funding rounds, in discussions around whether someone is going to get promoted or fired, certainly about whether an agency contract is going to continue, that kind of thing. Or just on a basic everyday basis, a lot of companies have enormous ad spends and they justify how they do that spending with Google Analytics data. So, it's pretty important stuff to get right and understand actually, but we just sort of take it at face value instead. So, probably the biggest things are around how Google Analytics has tried to mimic sort of real world patterns and how we visit shops and things, and convert that into its schema for how people visit websites. So it has this system of hits and sessions and users, which has just sort of become the standard. I mean, I don't think Google Analytics was the first platform to use that kind of system, but actually how you define those types of interaction, those sort of levels of interaction, are kind of arbitrary in a way. So, for example, in the real world, if I visit a shop one day and then I visit the same shop the next day, you would probably want to call that 2 visits.
Yes.
To the shop. So Google Analytics, follows that logic, calls it 2 visits or 2 sessions these days. And the way it does that is it just goes by calendar date. That has a massive unintended consequence, which is that if you visit the website at 11:59 and start your session, you're actually going to have 2 sessions, one of which starts at whatever page you were on, whatever the first page you clicked onto was after midnight. So for websites which are normally 24/7, a lot of them do get a lot of traffic during the night. Yeah. A lot of them will be international and have their time zone set in the country they're based, which isn't necessarily where all the visitors come from. Can actually have quite a significant effect. And there's also a similar parallel with real world stores in terms of people leaving and coming back again. So if I walk out of Tesco's, go to Costa, and then come back to Tesco's half an hour later, Tesco's probably wants to call that 2 visits. And, it's the same with a a website. So we have this inactivity thing. Except the trouble is with a website, when we come back, we're going to come back wherever we left off, potentially, in the same tab it might be, and that can end up with us having a loss of attribution data, because I'm going to go on and convert after that period of inactivity. It'll be in a second session, and it'll be attributed to some page on our website rather than the PPC spend that brought us around in the first place.
Now, attribution's a bit tricky in Google Analytics, isn't it? Tell us a bit about that, sort of non-directed traffic and stuff like that.
Right. So, I mean, there's been a bit of a thing recently around so-called dark traffic, which is where search traffic or social traffic, particularly from secure search, some people say, but also from in the majority of cases, I would say, from social apps and email apps. You get traffic that isn't actually direct, reporting as direct. And then on the other side, because although people assume Google Analytics uses last click attribution, it actually uses last non-direct click attribution, which is probably uncoincidentally quite flattering to Google's own channels. So on the one hand, we have this data that we have these visits that aren't direct being attributed to direct. And then on the other hand, we have these visits that are actually direct. It could be someone using a bookmark or typing it into their browser, being attributed to whatever their previous session was because of last non-direct click, which is the attribution model that Google Analytics uses. So the whole system of measuring how people got to our website and made these conversions, which is a huge part of Google Analytics use case, obviously, is actually ridiculously fuzzy.
Now, how easy is it, Tom, to effectively fake data in Google Analytics? 'Cause I'm interested in this because you mentioned earlier about, sort of board decisions are made on Google Analytics interpretations.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, that's definitely something where I would urge a little bit of caution, especially if you're in a vertical where you think maybe your competitors aren't the nicest people. But it's always been possible to fake Google Analytics data in your own account or in anybody else's account. It's always been possible to take your own tracking code or someone else's tracking code, put it on some high traffic page, and just generate a load of bump that will end up in that account, and to fake data that way. But since the measurement protocol was introduced with Universal Analytics a few years ago now, it's now ridiculously easy to do that, and you can fake it in very convincing ways as well. Over time, you can simulate pretty much anything you want that could, try to muck around with your competitors' ad spend, which is often driven, or at least uses decisions based on analytics data, or you could make it look like they needed to, invest in some product or country that's actually not doing anything at all. Or you could just, falsify data and pictures so it looks like your business is more valuable than actually it is. Obviously, it goes without saying, I encourage you not to do any of these things, but you should know that they're possible. And this is what I say, you shouldn't take analytics data at face value. That there is almost no way of getting data about your website actually that's completely bulletproof. But if you are worried about this kind of thing, a good place to start would be logs.
Yeah.
People will find ways of mucking around with that, whether it be by spamming your server or whatever it might be. But at least you can compare the two and try and spot the inconsistencies.
Now, this whole subject of misleading metrics is an interesting one. I know that there's certain metrics to be wary of, aren't there? I mean, time on page is one of them, isn't it, Tom?
You're absolutely right, yeah. So, I mean, this is actually a massive pet hate of mine. So this is, moving away from sort of ways in which Google Analytics doesn't work quite how it expects, and over to it just not doing its job very well. Engagement metrics are a really interesting subject because, obviously I come from an SEO background, and the big craze for some time in SEO has been this sort of top of funnel content, content that's all about getting links and engagement and this kind of thing. But engagement is not that easy to measure. You can tell how many people saw something, but not whether they actually spent any time looking at it, and maybe it made some kind of lasting brand impression.
Yeah.
And time on page you would think one of the best ways to look at this, intuitively, except there's sort of a problem here, not just with Google Analytics, but with time on page in general. And that's that analytics platforms have no idea how long you're going to linger on the last page you visit. So say I come to your website, I land on some amazing blog post you've written, and then I spend 10 minutes reading that blog post. Then I close the tab and continue with my day. What the analytics platform has seen in that, that good engaged visit is one hit when you first loaded the page, and they don't know whether you looked at it for 0 seconds or 5 years.
Yes.
There's absolutely no way for them to tell the difference if no other hits are being fired on that page.
Yeah.
And Google Analytics actually tries to bodge this by, instead of, you'd think time on page would just be, the total time on the site divided by the number of page views. It's an average in effect.
Yeah.
But actually, they do time on page divided by page views minus exits. So that basically to try and disinclude that last interaction where they're just assuming you spent 0 seconds on a page you might be viewing for 10 minutes. So they just remove that from the metric altogether, which means that then even when people do put in extra interactions to try and capture how long people were on that page that they were on when they eventually left,
yes,
it actually ends up even more misleading than it started, because Google Analytics is then mucking with the average to try and bodge its original solution. So essentially, in our experience, time on page can actually be reported time on page in Google Analytics can actually just be completely uncorrelated and quite wildly wrong versus any intuitive measurement of time on page. I've seen sites that claimed an average time on page of 17 minutes, where it was closer to 10 seconds, and pretty much vice versa. It's just, and time on site is no better, I'm afraid. It's just almost completely broken metric because of that inability to capture later interactions.
Yeah.
There are some alternative engagement metrics. Obviously, bounce rate is a very popular one, but that can be quite challenging as well, because if you're looking at a piece of information on your site, a lower bounce rate might not always be better, because maybe you're looking for people to find the answer to their question straight away, and that's what a good brand experience would be. So bounce rate, it's useful, but you have to be kind of careful with it. And then the other sort of more robust engagement metrics, like scroll depth, like micro conversions, such as email sign up, they require you to do some setup yourself.
Just remind us, Tom, the definition of scroll depth.
Right, of course. Sorry. So scroll depth basically is how far down a page you got before you left it.
Right,
so
yes.
Obviously most pages continue beneath the fold. So you can set it up so that as you scroll down, it fires events into Google Analytics, which you could actually record as goals if you wanted.
Yeah.
So for example, you could have a goal for someone getting to the bottom of a blog post.
And micro conversions, are these a bit like when you set sort of like mini goals or sort of?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of
so on a site where a macro conversion might be, a really simple case, e-commerce, a macro conversion is buying a product.
Yeah.
A micro conversion might be signing up to some kind of reminder about when this product is on offer, or signing up to their newsletter, or creating an account, something like that.
So this is all useful stuff. So it's worth knowing about these weirdnesses with Google Analytics. So further, because our listeners love tips and tricks. Further tips and tricks, I'm especially thinking about when you're sort of going through your Google Analytics reports and things. What sort of things should you be aware of? What sort of things should you be looking at?
That's a good question. I think that obviously analytics audits are a whole topic in their own right. But I think on theme with some of the stuff I've mentioned today, I would encourage you to have a look at your landing page report and see if you can find one or both of your checkout page listed as a landing page, or in brackets not set. Because those are both kind of interesting cases where obviously it makes absolutely no sense for people to be arriving via the checkout or have a session with no landing page at all. But most analytics accounts that I see feature these quite prominently, often as some of the highest converting landing pages, in fact. And there are some quite common and easily fixed reasons why these come about. So in the case of the landing page being the checkout for a whole bunch of conversions, that can often be people just having a think in the middle of their conversion process, maybe going away and have a cup of tea, particularly for high value products. So that can just be, an inactivity problem. So something you could consider doing there is extending the inactivity period. But more commonly, it can happen when people have separate payment subdomains, or when you take people off site to pay on something like PayPal. And if you don't have your cross-domain or cross-subdomain tracking set up properly, or if you don't have PayPal excluded as a referrer, then that can trigger the start of a new session. And you end up with a session that contains the checkout and the conversion, but no attribution data, and another session with the attribution data, but no conversion. Not set is a more interesting one, because that's a session with no pages in it. So there are two sort of interesting ways that can come about. One of them is if people on the last page they're on your website, if they go inactive on that for 30 minutes, then they come back and they scroll around, maybe click on some stuff without loading a new page, but they set off an event. You get a session with an event but no page view. You could also, if you're doing some tracking of offline interactions, it could trigger that. That's sort of hopefully why it happens, but in reality, 90% of the times we see this, it's because people have some legacy of their old tracking code hanging around on their website. So, for example, we'll see people who have updated to Universal Analytics tracking code years ago, but there'll be some weird widget on their site that still has old-fashioned tracking code, and it's just creating sessions in its own right with just these events in it and no landing page. It's just completely useless and lost micro conversions.
So it's worth keeping your website clean and up to date, isn't it?
Well, basically, yeah. I mean, that's the lesson of a lot of these things, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm glad that I'm not the only one that spends about 5 or 10 minutes sort of wiggling my fingers and taking deep breaths before I press buy on expensive items.
I mean, I've spent days sometimes, I think.
Yeah. Just leave it and you come back a week later and you find it's gone up in price. Especially, anyway, let's not go into Amazon. Whoops, I mentioned Amazon. I know you've got some interesting thoughts on under the sort of topic of tips and tricks on advanced segments, haven't you, and sequences?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I just think that advanced segments are, pretty much everyone who uses Google Analytics a lot uses advanced segments, but they're kind of an underutilized feature at the same time because of this feature of them, which is a feature within a feature, which is sequences, which just allows you to do stuff that you couldn't do anywhere else in Google Analytics. So, for example, you could make a advanced segment using the sequences menu that said something like a session starts with any user interaction, and then at some point later on, there's the checkout page. Then at some point later, after the checkout page, there's the FAQ page, all within one session. So what you've done there is you've created a segment of sessions in which potential buyers got cold feet because they looked at, or buyer's remorse, because they looked at the checkout. Then in the same session, after having been to the checkout, they looked at the FAQ page. There's almost always some of these on an e-commerce website that has an FAQ page.
Yes.
And it can be really useful for your CRO to try and figure out, how people got to the site and what products they were looking at, and what they did between the checkout and the FAQ page, what site search terms they use, that kind of thing, to try and figure out, what was it that led them to have those doubts. But that's a relatively basic use case. If you want to be a bit fancier, you could say, I'm interested in users who arrived at the site via Google, then subsequently arrived at the site via email. And basically what you've done there is created a segment of your marketing strategy having gone right. So it's a great way of figuring out which of your landing pages are really working for you in terms of converting one-time organic visitors into people who want to receive emails from you and feel positive about you as a website.
Now, user flow reports, again, are there some sort of customizations you can do there to help with this sort of issue of sort of misrepresentation of data? Or even misrepresentation of data? Get my teeth in.
I think user flow reports are just another example of this sort of commonly used yet underused feature, because people often sort of take a glance at them but not really play around with them that much.
Yeah.
If you go into a user flow report and then you click on one of the big green blocks and just click on explore through this page, then that's something that people do reasonably often, and it just shows you all the traffic moving in and out of an individual page on your website. It'd be quite useful for understanding which are the most prominent aspects of the nav, what people are trying to do on that page, how people get to that page, that kind of thing. But when you do that, an extra button appears above the block you're focusing on, which looks like a little pen. And it's actually kind of glitchy, and it often overlaps with other text and stuff. It seems like Google themselves have forgotten about it. But if you click on that pen, it'll allow you to use regex to define a page group. So, for example, you could then define, for example, all of your product pages, and then you could say, I want to look at how people come in and out of all of my product pages rather than just some individual URL, and that makes user flow reports immensely more powerful as a feature.
Wow. Well, best of luck using regexes to define a page. Right. We all love regexes, don't we? Well, Tom, thanks so much for coming on. Some really good tips there. How can our listeners find out more about you and more about Distilled?
Well, Distilled, of course, has a website where you can find our blog, newsletter, conferences, training platform, etc., and that's distilled.net. But me personally, you can follow on Twitter. I'm at THCapper, THCAPPER.
Fantastic. And thank you for our fantastic listeners for listening. Show notes are in the usual place, sitevisibility.com/IM podcast. I'm still saying /, aren't I? It's just slash. We all know which way the slash goes on the internet, don't we? If you want to connect with me personally, I'm Dr. Pod, DoctorPod on Twitter and LinkedIn. And if you've got any questions that you want to ask, please send those to podcast@sitevisibility.com. That's the email, or the magic telephone line is +44 1273 256 150. Well, that's all from me, Andy, and it's all from Tom.
Thanks, Andy.
And we'll see you next time on Internet Marketing.